welcome to Foster Friday Live. We are so glad that you are joining us today, and we are just thrilled to have Rebecca with us, and we're going to be talking about emergency and short-term foster care placement. So I know that there is a lot of maybe confusion or misunderstanding, or even just people not being aware of the option of doing short-term placements. So we're really excited to have you. And as you join us, if you will just tell us that you're here, leave us a comment. We've already gotten lots of questions. So if you have more questions as we're going, please feel free to leave them there and we'll make sure to answer them. So would you mind just introducing yourselves and tell us a little bit about your role?
Okay. I'm Rebecca Elwood and I work on the placement team. There's currently 4 of us and a supervisor. We will be having a 5th position come soon, but we call when a child enters care from the 10 counties that we manage. We call them and let them know that or get information from the county, and then we call families that are in that range to see if they'd be willing to accept a child.
So basically your team manages, and for the upstate in particular, the region's open bed list, you might call it. Okay. Yes. And so as we're talking about emergency and short-term placements, kind of, when we think of becoming foster parents, we might think of just that long-term placement. Well, you never know how long they're going to be around,
right.
But that longer-term placement. So can you tell us a little bit more about what is an emergency placement? What does that mean? Or what might that mean? Because we know that it might mean some different things. Right.
So when we've gotten to the end of a day or close to the end of the day, and we've worked on finding a long-term placement for a child, if we've not been successful in finding that placement, we will start calling our short-term families to see if they will be interested in an overnight. It could be that we have a family available for a child, but they may be not available for a couple days, so then we'll find a short-term placement for that child to go. So that's really what the emergency is a child that is at risk of being in the office for that night.
Right. So an emergency placement is basically placed in a home for a short term until a long-term family is found.
Correct.
Right. So so you told us a little bit, they've been in the office, you're not able to find a home. Why is that considered an emergency?
We are not allowed to obviously leave any children in the office for the night, so that's our emergency. Is we want to make sure that child has a bed to lay in that night in a home to secure them, so that we are not risking them being in the office or violating any kind of Michelle H. laws.
So does how is that end of the day defined? Is it based on when the child comes in? Like, is it automatically an emergency placement if they come in at 10 o'clock at night, or?
Yes, then it would be an emergency placement. We may call some long-term families at 10 p.m. trying to see if we can secure that placement, but once we've been unsuccessful, no matter what time it is, we're going to. Now, of course, we have kids that come in all throughout the day, and once we get to the bottom of our list and say, well, we don't have a home for them for the night, we're going to try that short-term list. It may be we've already gotten all our answers at 2 p.m., so we're going to continue working on it.
Right. So you've gotten no all the way down the list, every family that you're possibly able to call.
Right.
And so at that point, it does become an emergency to get them a bed for that night.
Right.
Okay. So we've talked about on Foster Friday Live before how placements are made, typically long-term placements. So is there a difference in terms of how emergency placements are made?
And we have a full list of all our families that are managed by DSS that we will access, and they're color coded. So if you are a long-term family, you're one color. If you're a short-term family, you're another color. So then once we've exhausted all our long-term options for that day, we will start looking at our short-term families to see who would be an appropriate placement for that child.
So could a family be color coded for both? Could they be long-term and short-term, or do you have to choose?
No, you can be long-term and short-term. We have notes on all of our families. So you may be open for long-term. It's very common to have a family open for long-term for a smaller child, but they're open for short-term until they have that long-term placement for any child, or something of that nature that would help.
Or maybe your long-term placement, like you have 4 spots to are long-term and those are filled, and so you're filling it.
Right.
Okay, so a family could do both.
Correct.
And that call comes in exactly the same way from the same people.
Yes.
Okay. So, and we talked about that. That call might not necessarily, it might be an emergency or an overnight placement. That doesn't mean you're calling in the middle of the night.
Correct.
But you might be.
But we might be.
So who makes a good short-term or emergency foster family? Is what if I was thinking about, going on the short-term list, what things should I think about, in terms of our skills as a family, our ability, our schedule, our openness, our beds? What should I think about before getting on that short-term list?
First and foremost would be your willingness. That's really our main thing, is knowing your family and knowing what you all can handle. If you're able to roll with the punches, you may be really good for short term. If you all don't do well with, you have to do rigid schedules and don't do well with that change, then maybe that's not for you all. Families, we have all kinds of families that work, families that don't work, that do all the short term. So it's how much sleep can you handle at night?
Yeah.
So if you're a family that doesn't do well with lack of sleep or something like that, that may be something to take into consideration when what you're open for.
Right. And one thing for me, because we've been on the long term and short term lists together separately at the same time, and I think too that the kids that we have in our home also kind of determine,
Absolutely,
whether we are accepting long term placements or not, whether we feel like they do well with kids, kind of coming and going. So I think that depends too. But hey, thank you so much for your question, Tamara. How is it color coded, especially if you're just glancing at the colors? So are you the open bed list, how is that color coded? A family just is kind of given a color in that Excel spreadsheet or that document?
Yes, it is an Excel spreadsheet. Gray means that right now, for whatever reason, you're not taking placements. We may even have notes in there as to why you're not taking placements, just so that we know if it's a time frame sensitive thing or not. But then we have green for go. Green means you're ready and open for long term. We have an orange color that's for short term emergency respite, and we've got several blocks in that Excel sheet. It's the family's name, it's the family, what they're wanting, it's your bed, your setup of your home, how it's set up, who you currently have in the home. That whole thing is highlighted.
Right. So as you're making calls, who that family is and what to expect. Does that answer your question? And I think too, like, it's one bed list with all the families, and they're just color coded. It's not separate lists for long term, short term, babies, older children. Yeah.
It's one running bed list. So I know once I've gone and scrolled the bed list for everything green and looked at the age range that the family will take, then I start working on orange. Now, of course, that's only for licensed families that are managed through DSS. Right. We reach out to our counterparts, the other agencies, and they have their own systems as to how they call families.
Would you mind just really quickly reminding us, because we have talked about placements before, but how it works with private agencies, just when that call is made to those CPAs, or are DSS families called first? Are they kind of called in coordination of just trying to find a home for that child?
So it's a coordination. We all have our own rhythm that we do in the placement team. I personally, when I have a child that's assigned to me to find placement for, I will go ahead and send it out to all the agencies, so they can be looking at the universal as well as long as I am, so that I'm not wasting any time reaching my families first and getting all no's before I even reach out to the other agencies.
So that might vary a little bit by placement team, by individual, but the private families are being considered as well.
Correct. Yes.
Great. So if a family has decided that they are interested in providing short-term care, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what that includes, emergency being one of those things, how do they get on the short-term list, whether they're also on the long-term list, or maybe they only want to do short-term care?
Just updating your licensing family support coordinator. If you are managed by, again, DSS, you can also reach out to the placement unit. We're not to reach out to families that are managed by the other ones, because they're managed by those agencies, and those agencies know their families. So so reach out to whoever is managing you, your family support coordinator, or the placement unit of whoever is managing you, and they should be able to update.
Awesome. So what should a family know in advance? We've talked a little bit about what short-term care is, what emergency placements are. What should a family know in advance if they're choosing to do short-term care?
So we will call them for any range child. If you're open to short-term, you can also have your preferences of what ages you will take for a short
Mm-hmm.
term. Have a really deep conversation with your family about what things you will and will not accept, so that we can note that. We do note
Right.
it on our list so that we know, okay, this family is open to pretty much anything, so we can call them for pretty much anything. I don't know if that really
Yeah.
answers the question.
So you should know, what your preferences are, what you're willing to
Right.
accept, and make sure that that is updated with your family support coordinator as well as the placement team.
Correct.
Okay. So we got this question in earlier on our Facebook page. What's the need? What's the need for emergency, like homes that will take emergency placements, or homes that will take an overnight or temporary? And then what does that look like by age range?
Okay. The need is family, large group sibling groups.
Yeah.
That is always great when a family enters care and it's a large sibling group, to be able to place them that first night all together before they're split several ways is a wonderful thing for them. So we may work a little longer on children that are in large sibling groups,
Right.
so that we can see if we can get some of those kids together instead of splitting them one by one.
Even just for an overnight.
Right. So an overnight is really wonderful, especially late in the night.
Yeah.
To say, okay, you're getting these 3-4 kids tonight together to keep siblings together. That's one thing. Another thing is the older children. Really, generally, anything over 6 or 7, there's a need for that overnight. 7 and above, we have to do diligent efforts to keep that child in a foster home statewide before we're allowed to even discuss the option of group care. So that sometimes takes more than a day or two to do.
Right. So they really are needing those emergency or overnight placements so that you can do your due diligence to find them a home before. So that might be one night, that might be a couple nights, while the placement team is really looking for a good fit for them. Okay. And you mentioned that there's not really a need for emergency homes for babies.
Right. Usually there's not. Now, short term, we may be calling you for a respite issue. We also do have families that will take babies. The only time we really use a short term for baby is if it's a newborn, that we have a family that will take them at 6 weeks, but they can't take them before the 6 weeks. That's the only incident we really use a short term.
Because there are so many long-term families that accept babies. There's just not really a need for emergency care for them. Yeah. So talk to us about what, so emergency is like overnight, like they need a place to stay, but there's a lot of things kind of included in short term. We talked about kind of coding those families as long term, short term, or maybe both. So what is included in short term? So emergency,
so children overnight. Then we have these higher need children who may have disrupted another placement, and they are needing a place to land for the night. We will continue to look for an appropriate placement for them the next day or that same day, but maybe we've just not been successful in finding that long term for them at that point. So there are higher need kids that we would generally not ask you for a long-term placement for, but they may have mental health issues or some kind of behavioral issues that really they're not something that you would consider long-term, but we still need to find them a home for the night.
And those are called emergency incentive kids, right? That may be going to therapeutic even, or another standard home that they've disrupted for some reason. Okay. And then, so that's emergency incentive. What is temporary? Or, I mean, it might be not considered something different than emergency, but temporary care, is that families who are willing to take for a weekend or a week? Because emergency might not be for just one night.
Right. So we do have families that say we are open to temporary care. We don't necessarily always have to utilize the longer end of temporary as much. Those would be the respite families that are willing to help with a week for another foster family, or a few days to help us get a child really a foster home that's most appropriate for that child. But the general consensus is that we're calling for that night. It's usually just that short term. It may turn into a couple days, and if we're asking you for an emergency incentive child and they still need placement that next night, you're going to be our first phone call, because we want them in any of the children that need to be nighted, we're going to ask you again, because we want them to stay in a familiar place as much as possible.
Right. And you had mentioned, like, if you get an emergency placement on a Friday night, they're not leaving Saturday morning, more
Right.
than
We don't.
likely.
Yeah, we don't have staff to assist in the weekends. Each county only has a handful, if that, of workers that are on call. It's usually one per shift.
Mhm.
So they do not have the ability to manage any kind of moves on the weekends, in addition to taking any children into care that need to be taken
Right.
into care.
So, I mean, that kind of makes me think, because we have been on the short-term list. We've done respite, we've done overnights, we've done the emergency incentive. We've also kind of done this temporary, where it's like we will, accept the child, until a home is found. That's kind of indefinite, but obviously you're trying to find a long-term placement quickly. So a family that works, or a family that their kids would have to go to daycare or to be in, so how does that work? How long might an emergency or temporary placement last?
So we are daily working on children. So
Mhm.
we don't have like a set time of how long that would take, obviously, but it is a daily thing. We're not going to forget about
You're
a child.
trying to get them out as
Correct.
quickly to a long-term
Right.
placement. Now, if a family like had to go to, they took a placement at 10 p.m., but they have to go to work at 8 o'clock the next morning. What does that look like?
So then we would notify the county. We will ask for your time frames. When are you able to accept this child tonight? When do you need them picked up in the morning or during that day? And so then we'll notify the county that this is the placement for the night, but they need to be picked up by this time. And so
Right.
then they will be picked up.
So
the
you
next
do
day.
have some control over, if you have to go to work the next day, the county can help you out and take that child
Absolutely.
into the office or wherever it might be.
Absolutely.
While you're at work. Okay. So the family does have a lot of kind of say in who comes into their home and how long they are there
Right.
for. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And as you guys have questions about emergency care, please let us know. That is so helpful, because I know that we don't know a whole lot about emergency, short term, all of these things, and it's something that is needed. And
Yes.
if more families could open their homes to that would definitely help children have a place to sleep at
Absolutely.
night, which is the goal.
Right.
So thank you all, and we will see you guys next week. Bye.
Yes.